So let's now refer to that in terms of rugby league. If I use all those examples or some of them, I spoke last week about how we coach players to express themselves less in this current era, this new way where we've apparently got it better than people had in the 60s or the 70s or even before that. We don't coach players to express themselves. Instead, we coach fitness and strength, and we coach a lot of structure. We also emphasize ruck control. Now, the key word there is control. Control is about stopping something or controlling something so it's in a lane. And that's a new way. That's the direction we've all been forced in or encouraged to go down. I said last week that the only true innovation that a team has come up with has been wrestling. Yes, wingers dive for tries better, but that's an individual task. But there's nothing new about passing the ball around, for example. So the Walker boys were credited with their style of football in 2015 that won the Queensland Cup and the national title with Ipswich Jets. And they called that contract football, which was actually devised by a guy called Duncan Thompson close to 100 years ago. And it's all about giving somebody in a better position than you the ball. So that's decision-making, that's passing the football. Des Hasler had his forwards passing at Canterbury, if you remember, just over 10, 12 years ago. And we thought this was an innovation. No, it wasn't an innovation. Ask people like Artie Beetson, Lee Crooks, and other forwards that pass the ball regularly, whether it was an innovation. Short dropouts have come back into the game. It's not the first time we've seen them. But I tell you what does thread through. Possession is still 9/10 of the law when it comes to rugby league. St. George won 11 straight premierships in the 1950s and the 1960s. And the rules had to be changed to them. They're the reason we have 6 tackles, because it used to be unlimited. And then they went to 4 tackles and then 6 tackles. And one of the reasons that St. George won all those premierships in the 50s and the 60s, they held the ball a lot more than other people. So the rules were changed. Penrith have won 4 premierships straight by playing a attritional, patient, grinding style of football. You could argue the mould has been changed a little bit in 2025 with Brisbane Broncos style, but that's because of a rule change. And that's because of the impact of the rule change a few years down the line when teams have become better at working out what that means for the sport. Going back to St. George, they also had coaches that had played in England and learned methods from there. Methods that the English Rugby League tossed off to follow the Australian method after they got battered in 1982 on a kangaroo tour. And people tell me that if you look at the coaching manuals of the 1950s and the 60s, a lot of it, the stuff that we try and coach now, was in those manuals in that era. And we said there was a better way of doing it, and we changed it. I'm talking about grip, pass, catch, carry, lines of run, etc. Tackle technique in terms of, well, it would have been around the legs then, wouldn't it? Well, what's going to happen is, over the coming years, because of the problems that occur due to concussion in the game, we'll be encouraged to tackle lower and lower and lower. I tell you what else threads through too. If you've got 2 props that are both 10 out of 10 in terms of ability, which one will win the day if they're playing against each other? The one who can intimidate and be tougher, or the one who just plays football? Which one do you think will win in the middle of the field? And I think you'll find it will be the one who can intimidate. And where I'm getting at here is, if your pack gets on top of the other team's pack, the opposition's pack, 9 times out of 10, you will win a game of rugby league, regardless of how many things change. Because a good big un will beat a good little un most of the time, one-on-one. And that doesn't change. I'll tell you what else doesn't change. The importance of kicking and kick chase. regardless of any new things that come into the game in terms of fitness and strength. And I tell you what else threads through now too. Sorry, always, not now. The speed of your catch and pass, the way you transfer the ball from one side of the field to the other. If your passing is slow, regardless of how fit you are, how strong you are, how great your game plan is, if your passing is slow and your decision making is poor, you will not maximize the ability of that team. And these things thread through everything. You can have the best systems in the world, attacking systems, defensive systems. They can be sparkling new. But if you can't catch or tackle, so if you're a fullback who can't catch a high ball, or a winger who can't catch a high ball, or somebody can't tackle in your defensive line, or a few people can't tackle in the defensive line, you're going to have some weaknesses in that side. So regardless of the system you have, you're going to have some weaknesses in that side that no system can beat. And another thread, and I want you to remember this one. If you don't hold the ball and if you give away lots of penalties and can't defend in tough circumstances, you will lose more than you win. So that's holding the ball, reducing your penalties, and defending tough circumstances is what you need to focus on. My name's Lee Addison. You're listening to the Rugby League Coach Podcast. Everyone can teach us something, you know. Well, that's another thing. When people have a bit of experience and maybe a bit of snow on top. I'm a year older than I was last week, by the way. And there's no more snow on my hair than there was a week ago, by the way. You get written off sometimes, don't you? You know, if a 65-year-old applied for a coaching job, they'd be written off because they're 65. But everyone can teach us something. Everyone can teach us something. The one standout man for me, and a guy that's been my biggest ever coaching mentor over the longest period, is a guy called Dr. Vinny Webb, who runs his own business now, mentoring organizations and coaches. And we still spend hours together dissecting everything after all these years. We sometimes talk about rugby league too. You know, we go into on all sorts of tangents. He and I were both lucky enough to work under ex-Newcastle Knights and St. George Illawarra coach David Waite in the development pathway set up in the UK in the early 2000s. Waite had the biggest influence technically on me as a young coach, and I still hear his phrases in my head sometimes. Des Hasler, when I worked under him, taught me about work ethic, key performance indicators, and leaving no stone unturned in preparation. His sessions were always massive events, and ever since I saw Des operate, and in the same year I saw a Michael Hagan session, I saw a Jason Taylor session at Parramatta and South Sydney, respectively, I think. I knew Manly were going to win the Premiership because their training was just an event. It was a big thing. So I encourage my coaches to make training a pressured environment within reason. Matthew Elliott was a big influence when it came to skill acquisition and conditioning games and variety at training. I remember Matthew Elliott's analysis when it comes to how players learned was a fantastic lesson to me. Also, the depth he went into when it came to how players should hold the ball. He was a person that taught me that if you're running in the middle of the field and a heavier defender is lining you up, you should hold the ball a little bit lower so that the opposition person looks at the ball and gets on their haunches and you can put footwork on them. Not that I ever had footwork as a player. Terry Matterson knew how to bring a team together in a short period of time. Both Matt and Terry I worked under with the USA. And what was excellent that I learned from them was, well, basically I'd always done this anyway, but I think they proved you could do this with NRL players too.